Today in News Tech, podcasts emerge as a significant source of news for nearly a quarter of Americans. Also, local news takes flight in South Dakota's largest city, with Pigeon 605 delivering personalized local news to residents of Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Next up, a publisher highlight on the Sedalia Democrat, where they launched an audio articles playlist on a third-party CMS. And finally, how to make data-focused decisions. Our first story here is actually, you know what? Let's start with the pigeon story. Let's go ahead and just watch the video that came from this really interesting startup called Pigeon 605.
Personalized local news arrives via novel delivery strategy. This episode of Today in News Tech is made possible with audio articles by ourhometown.com. Today we're highlighting a piece by Sarah Sire over at Neiman Lab. Local news takes flight in South Dakota's largest city, looking at Pigeon 605, an innovative news site with a distinctive delivery strategy. Pigeon 605 has built its content delivery strategy on the historical practice of using carrier pigeons to take messages from one place to another. In the modern era, these messages come in the form of personalized email or text newsletters featuring categories such as stories to make me smile or stories that will make me a more informed citizen. I didn't want to come in with something that looked like what everybody else was doing. I didn't start out covering crime and politics and weather. I went a different direction. I went where I thought there would be community interest, but also to places that would allow us to stand out, said founder Jody Schwan. Here are a few big takeaways. The quick survey that readers complete as they adopt their pigeon gives insights into the audience and provides a roadmap for moving ahead. The revenue model for the site includes advertising and, in particular, sponsored stories partnering with local nonprofits, businesses, and corporations. In the year since its founding, 4,000 people have picked a virtual pigeon to deliver news based on their interests and neighborhood. Our hometown strives to provide its customers the latest tools to engage with their audience. In particular, the newsletter retargeting feature allows publishers to personalize content delivery.
Okay, so that is what I want to take away from this. Let's unpack it a little bit first, but eventually I want to get to something that we could recreate on WordPress. It sounds like they've got a really smart approach. The whole pigeon thing is not really the point. The point is the way they sign up for the newsletter and the way they're gathering information. I want to get to that in a minute, but Chris, you read this article, you did the whole report. Is there anything else that you want to emphasize here or maybe elaborate on from the video?
Well, I think this just continues a thread of hyper-local journalism that we've been covering over the past couple of months. In this way, I just thought it was a very interesting and kind of catchy way of data gathering.
Right.
In the biggest part of it. And in particular, the less technical questions, the more like semantically natural questions to ask you or ask a reader what they might be interested in, instead of how many times a week do you do this or some of the other kind of stale ways of finding it. I think what really sets us apart is the design of the interaction is what really sells this, and then they wrap it in this kind of cool, fun character. And,
it's a little mascot.
But the news itself is still serious community news. They just kind of give it a nice presentation that I thought was really cool.
Yes. So the goal of this whole podcast is just to take lessons from successful startups or even legacy brands that are just doing really interesting things on digital. So let's just walk through this process of adopting a pigeon. And I have not done this, so I wanted to save it.
Looking forward to this part of the demo.
Right. So let's just try to imagine how we could replicate this whole process on WordPress. That's the key here. This is something that we should definitely consider for people signing up for a paid subscription, but even for just newsletter signups, just to learn a little bit more about those people. But definitely when they're paying for a subscription, we want to learn as much about them and their interests as we can so we can provide the most personalized information. Email, first step.
Really awesome just interface thing is the progress bar. is
Yep.
really,
It goes a long
helpful.
way. Right.
Really
Yes, we can do that with gravity forms. I'm not sure if it's always the default, but whether we would want to use gravity forms for this or the newsletter forms, I think we may end up needing gravity forms. So just because it gives a lot more flexibility. I don't know if a newspaper would want to work in something along these lines where they can personalize their little avatar.
Some of the papers have mascots. Yeah.
Sure, right. So name your pigeon. Oh, geez. Now I'm going to have to be creative. Okay, so I'm actually, is it going to let me do? Okay, I guess I'll just do Salt Lake City.
The author said, even though she's never been to South Dakota, she's going to keep her pigeon around just for the novelty of the way it works.
Okay, very cool. And this is a story we'll continue to monitor as I get emails. Accommodate that route.
You can put some fake stuff in there if you don't want to put all the private things.
Right. And college. Interesting.
Now, those all look like local universities.
Right. I don't think I want to select all. We'll just do one. High school. We'll just do another random one. Okay, so let's stop right there.
Some pretty heavy demographics.
That alone, to know which subscribers went to what high school in the area. A lot of people stay in the area that they grew up in. Just opt them in to some type of education or sports newsletter or the sports headlines from their particular school. That's just more data to work off of.
Not only that, Matt, you're gathering information for advertisers as well.
There may be something in the disclosures about this form that specifies the amount of sharing that they actually do. I hope that should be in here.
But I think you can still approach, a college or an auto dealer or someone and say, look, we have 50 people that went to this high school within the past, because you can figure it out by their age. Within the past 10 years.
Well, weren't we talking about this last week, targeting life events? 10-year reunion, 20-year reunion. I don't think we by default gather the birthday of any subscribers. That alone would go a long way.
This reminds me of a Facebook profile, to be honest.
Right, and they get it. I think you could argue Facebook's is starting to turn around. There's a lot of issues there. The reason that they've grown to be the biggest social network in the world is they know so much about their users.
And
without
we'll
a doubt.
To this, but the revenue that may have a good bit to do with the revenue model, which we can talk about in a minute here.
Which it sounds like it's mainly advertising right now. Okay, so what information should your pigeon carry for you? So categories. This would be, to me, it would just be the most natural thing to just list all the categories on the website.
Or topics that might umbrella multiple categories is maybe like what they might be doing here as well.
And this is something we could bring up for long-term pipeline stuff with engineering. They are developing that natural language processing to put certain articles into buckets of topics that we could export a list like that and say, look at their entire archives and get a list of all the topics that have ever been mentioned and rank them by frequency that they're mentioned, and then include the top 10 topics or something. And
then also sneak in some ones that you might want to be testing as well to see what kind of response you get.
Thinking lowest common denominator, the simplest way to get into this, categories or just topics that you are covering a lot would fit in that step. How often would you like delivery?
Yeah, I like this page too. I thought this was very nice way of kind of framing this.
So we got 3 options, as much as possible so I don't miss anything, but not so much that it's annoying. Okay, whenever it's gathered enough of my news, maybe once or twice a week. That's the only one that actually lists a frequency. I would like to know the frequency of all these. I mean, this is probably daily. Special deliveries, seems like it would almost be no regular frequency. It could almost be random.
Well, I'm wondering if there's no content that's relevant to that category listing you just went through, that if you just don't get something. Or maybe they could even send you a follow-up email saying, there hasn't been a lot of things coming up. Do you want to go back and share more of your interests?
Right.
Deliver more stories.
The opportunities are almost endless, like for, how much you could do with this. It's just, what's the simplest thing that we could gather? To boil it down, we're pretty much done with this form, it looks like. They're getting a phone number. Let's just think about the simplest information to boil it down. We said birthday, categories of interest. If I had to pick two things, it would probably be those two, but then maybe opening it up to some personal information, the college in the area, different colleges in the state. You could get a list together like that. Anything else that you guys think would be worth gathering? I mean, think about Facebook.
How many times a week do you go out to eat?
Information on businesses that they use.
Do you consider yourself a foodie? It seems like they kind of frame things around these kind of...
the novelty aspect.
Just take a step back to what you just said. What if they just put a list of all the advertisers in the newspaper and say, which of these do you use? Which of these have you visited in the last month or done business with in the last year? Very useful. But then you're going into specifics there about lifestyle with the gym membership. I guess that kind of question is more looking for opportunities, whether they have a gym membership or not. That might be an opportunity to introduce them to an advertiser that's fitness oriented. Let's just see if we can take this to, honestly, I think Jack could pretty much set this up with the tools that we have, but there may need to be some engineering involved in just making the whole list management a little bit more automated. But what I'm picturing then is if we've got these categories that people are opting into, we could have a weekly newsletter. Well, it's just getting into the category specific newsletters, basically. And it's just making it easier to get people to sign up for those lists. Because otherwise, what have we been talking about? We've mainly been talking about things like Nordac Publishing. If you go to their site, you can join the mailing list, and you can choose the different titles that you want to get newsletters on. This format, we can follow that for categories too. If this wasn't a multi-paper site, then this type of sign up would probably have the different categories listed out here. So you could select that. But the difference here is that we've already got our foot in the door. They're signing up to be a paid subscriber. I just think it's a missed opportunity to not at least ask what sections are you interested in and get some of this data as they're signing up.
Big question I think this presents to publishers, and maybe Carolyn can jump in here. How much work is this going to make? How much work is it going to create for the publisher? Are they going to have to hire somebody just to manage newsletters?
And that's what I'm talking about when I say we've got to make it turnkey. It cannot be extra work. We've got to have it basically automatically flow from the sign up where they opt into the categories to that person's email getting put on that specific newsletter list. This is something that we could try out with the Today in News Tech newsletter, something along these lines, just get some experience with real people that are on that live newsletter. Any other comments on that before we move to the next headline?
I think the revenue model is pretty impressive that they are pulling off here, because all of that data they're getting means they're basically turning that back around and focusing purely on advertising and sponsored content in order to make sure that all that pigeon adoption fun is delivered to the readers for free.
Right. And not only that, you take this back to your newsroom and say, okay, we've been covering too much of this and not enough of it.
We're going to talk a little bit about making data-driven decisions, but this is one source of data, the reader reported or self-reported data, you could call it. But then there's the actual stats. Look at your analytics and see what is everybody actually doing. And plus, those are two kind of different use cases, deciding what to cover in the newspaper in general versus what to send a specific subscriber in a newsletter. Those can be two completely different things, right? You could have the top categories be sports and obituaries, but then this subscriber is most interested in the agriculture news section, and the other sections are just not even on their radar. So the data is there. We're kind of leaving some of it on the table by not asking these questions. Good stuff. Okay, very cool. Just a quick headline that I saw in my media post newsletter this morning that I just wanted to point out, that podcasts continue to rise to more and more significance in the news business. So podcasts emerge as significant new source of news. And the stats are basically that nearly a quarter of Americans get their news from podcasts. I'm not quite sure of the frequency of that, whether it's a weekly basis that they're getting news, but they're also pointing out that 56% of the people in this survey have never gotten news from podcasts, and they're saying that represents a potential for growth. I think it's a very interesting area, obviously something that we're investing in with audio articles, and it's a way for a publisher to get into the podcast space without any extra effort. We do put a lot of time into producing this weekly podcast. Certainly not every publisher has that bandwidth or interest. They may not want to be kind of like a radio personality, but with audio articles, you can get the information into the format that this quarter of Americans prefers to get their news from. I just thought that was a nice stat. That's a good one for a did you know? A quarter of Americans get their news from podcasts. Just that alone is all you need from this article. But, they do go into much more detail. We'll post this on the website as a follow-up and put it on Twitter as well. Let's move on to this publisher highlight here. So the Sedalia Democrat, and let's give a shout out to them on social media so they can see this video. They approached us. It's almost a year now that they've been using this ever since we did our big webinar on audio articles as a third party. They do not use Our Hometown for their CMS, but they still can get audio on their site. And this is the format that it takes. This player that they can display as a widget anywhere on the website. This is a Buzzsprout feature. And what's technically happening is they provided an RSS feed from their current CMS, which sends all the articles over to a demo site that we set up for them. So they don't need to change anything about their website. We just need the RSS feed. And then it's going to send the articles. Technically, it's going to be going to this URL. Now, there's not really much to this. This is not a live site. No one's going to see it. It's just a prototype that we set up for them to manage this third-party audio creation. So we do set up a CMS for them, and they can log into this, and they can adjust things with the audio. They can change the audio voice. They can change which categories are turned into audio. They can really manage everything with the feed through this prototype site. But another thing that we're going to be providing is this playlist generator. So this comes with every audio article plugin on WordPress. And as a third party, what they could do is link to this from their current site, and we could host it as a subdomain. Sedalia Democrat is not using that right now, as far as I know, but if they wanted to, we could set it up so the URL is audio.sedaliademocrat.com, so they don't have the whole Our Hometown thing in there. But this is really just a totally turnkey player that they could offer to their readers. And the really interesting thing about this is that it uses the related articles technology to create an unlimited number of playlists. So I can open a playlist and I could just listen to this week's articles. Okay. And this is just a list of the most recent articles published on the site. I could also go to a category that they've set up and just listen to that category, one story after another. But if I go look at this new audio articles, if I select a single story in here, you see how these other articles are not the same as what we have here. This is just the newest audio articles. If I click on a police report, though, it's going to give me a bunch of police reports because they share common language, a similar category, just in the way that Spotify and Pandora can create playlists of music from a single song. You'll choose a song and say, I want a playlist, other songs that are like this one. That's the exact same thing that's happening here, but it's with news articles. The bottom line is this is like an endless source of content. You can come in here and just have feeds based on any one article and just keep going through this. And it's just going to keep going. There's really no bottom to this because they're just going to become less and less related to the original article if you really keep going down far enough. Any one story could be used as a seed for a playlist. And then once you hit play, you could be on your phone. You could just close the phone and just put it in your pocket and listen to a custom playlist based on that article that you found interesting. What we're then doing is feeding this back from this prototype site to the player here. So a little bit of a circuitous way of doing it. We're not installing a plugin directly on the CMS, but that's by design. We don't want to have to mess with your website at all. We're completely outside your CMS as a third party. We just need that RSS feed. But the end result is a seamless experience for the user. Let's bring it over to Tyler. Do you have any questions on this?
The only question I do have now is with the player page, where do they go to manage what playlists show up on there?
This is the dashboard of the site that I just showed. So this is the kind of nothing prototype that no one is going to see except the publisher. So if they want to change anything about how this works, they would do it in here. So that I would log in, and once I'm logged in, just like on any full CMS that we do for a publisher, they're going to have the admin bar at the top, and they could go into the dashboard. They're not going to need to use any of this really. They might want to go into articles if they wanted to, let's say, change the version that is the audio version. Maybe they want to include some extra information in the audio version that wasn't on the website or vice versa. They can come in here and edit the articles because these are technically what is converted into audio. We're taking an RSS feed, importing it into the article editor, creating these articles, and then from here, the audio version is created. Now, the categories, just managing the feed, you would come up to the audio articles plugin right here, and you can look at your dashboard just to look at the history of everything that's been published. You've got podcast feeds. So I believe this is where they would create the different categories. You see, the only thing that we have on this one is the podcast feed. But if they wanted to separate out into more than one category, they would do it here. So you could add a new category from the RSS feed, and then that would be segmented out into its own on the audio article player page. So that's where it would be. If they wanted to take advantage of this playlist page, we would customize it. We could have all their categories here if they wanted to. But again, Sedalia is not really promoting this page yet. They just have the Buzzsprout player. So that's a good question. There's that one. We've got an audio lead-in. So this is the audio ad feature. So you could create an audio ad that appears before every audio article. Just type out the text and anything that you want to say for an advertiser that would automatically be inserted before each article.
Are you talking universally? Because per article, you can do that.
But yes, you're right. If you want to change it on the article level, you could come in, open up the article. And this is where I was saying earlier, you could change the content of the audio, or you could change the voice name just for this one story right here. So it's all right there. You're not going to need to scroll and look for it. It's really just these two sections that you'd have to manage. You could also change the category here if you wanted that audio story to appear in multiple categories on the player page.
Can you flip to the visual tab there, Matt? Because that looks like a lot of work.
You definitely don't need to edit it like that. You could just have your rich text editor. Pretty straightforward once you get it set up. And if we have an RSS feed with the full content, then we can get the entire article in here. If you just wanted a teaser version for the audio, we could do that too. There's a lot of different ways that we can customize this. I think this is at a point where we're still going to be really involved in the setup and customizing things for publishers. We want to be really hands-on during these setups, but it's good to let them know what's possible, but I wouldn't necessarily expect the publisher to go in here and customize this. That's how that works right now. All right. So let's wrap things up here with our last story. This is from Tyler on making data-focused decisions. Do you want to walk us through this one, or should we just give it a quick listen and then take it from there? What do you think?
It's pretty straightforward, but I do think that it is very relevant to especially what we were discussing in how to approach today in news tech, actually.
This is part of the reason we're doing this is we need to be publishers ourselves to really understand our customers and their needs. We're using all our own tools. Today in News Tech is a WordPress site that's exactly like all of our customers, using all the same plugins. So let's just go through the big takeaways here. Insight based on data rather than raw numbers and statistics. So what's an example of that? Most popular category, just boiling down your top categories rather than giving just a list of page views by category or something like that?
Right. Like you need someone on your team to interpret the data is basically the larger gist of this article.
Okay.
But what this is saying is like, don't come to your team and say, hey, we're getting a lot of readers here. Say, these are what our readers are engaging with. And here's what we can infer from that is actionable.
Actionable. When you say that, I mean, what I think of immediately, it's probably the most simple action you could take. But if you identify your top 3 most popular categories, then you just expand on those categories. So give them more room in print, and then also at the same time, more room online, right? What else could we do? I mean, is there something related to advertising, some type of action we could take from these insights for advertisers just by looking at the most successful articles possibly? Could you then say, this article was the most popular in the month of February. We're going to do a follow-up on it. And ad sales staff.
I think on top of that, I would look at like maybe trying to figure out why the article was popular. It could be that it was just popular because it was something related to something happening in February.
Right.
Or it could be an evolving story. Right. It could just have been a fluke. But I think that level of analysis is really what this is getting at. It's saying like, don't just look at the pure stats of this is a thing people are reading, but maybe it's not worth following up. Maybe it was just going to hit high that one time.
For a lot of these things, I find it hard to talk about in such abstract terms. So like you said, let's try to apply this to today in news tech, just because that's what we're most familiar with. The first thing I was just thinking about that is if we're looking for the next topic to cover, we could go back and look at the stats on the website, but you've really got to gather it from all the social platforms because we're getting more engagement on social media than we are on the website at this point. So it's got to be comprehensive. You've got to just sum up all your engagements across all platforms. And that's another factor in what kind of action you're going to take as a follow-up, because maybe you focus on just promoting the article on the platform that it was originally most successful on, or you go back and do a little bit of a reverse engineering and say, why did this article take off on Twitter? In our case, we had a couple stories this week that got more likes and reshares than usual. So who did we mention in that article? Who was
exactly?
What was the hashtag in that one? Maybe that hashtag should be prioritized in future posts, just in general, or for posts in this category. If you are really hands-on with your social media and you're putting on custom hashtags and you're mentioning handles for organizations or people in the community, that alone is just like a takeaway that I've really learned from this whole project. Mentioning organizations, then they will almost always retweet or like your post, and then that feeds into the Twitter algorithm and gets you in front of their audience. Can't say exactly how much of their audience are going to see your post then, but that's something that we should definitely think about for the social auto post feature. That would be a huge enhancement if we could identify good hashtags for an article.
That almost feels like it could be associated with the SEO plugin.
The SEO plugin, definitely. I think the related stories feature would help us identify the terms that are the most central to the article and bring those out, include them as a hashtag, or suggest them as a hashtag, maybe initially having a suggestion, or they could just quickly choose the hashtags to include. Could we even somehow identify if there's an organization mentioned in the article, could we identify the Twitter handle or the Facebook?
I've been doing some research on how our social media plugin works. And one of the interesting things I found was Blog to Social actually has a feature that will read the tags off of a WordPress article and post those as hashtags. in the social media post.
There you go. Okay.
And I think I think there's places in the article set up where you can have like a pool of tags that will autocomplete for authors and things like that. And then if you're not necessarily automating it, because it'd have to be some kind of scripting thing to parse out if there's a company name or something.
Right.
But it's really easy to write an article, go into the auto post, basically switch out any names you want for mentions. The hashtags will be in there if you put tags on that, or you can put those in manually.
Right.
Then you can flip images, all kinds of different stuff, and then just schedule it to go out whenever you want. So it can be more hands-on, but it can be very automated too with the post templates that they have.
I think you just kind of gave us a roadmap to it. So the tags feature, it's not something that we necessarily use much.
Normally it's just for searching the site itself, but if Blog to Social can transfer those into hashtags, it just simplifies that and kind of gives you the consistency you want for your content.
That's a way to get it into Blog to Social. What we would need to come up with is a way to get it into the tags area of the article. And that could be done maybe with the SEO plugin or with related stories. So that would be where the development would have to be. But then we could just turn on that feature.
Just a brainstorm, but if you substituted the person's name and you actually just added a hyperlink to their Twitter page, then it would be able to parse it and know what their handle is and all that. And so that might be a way to tackle that. It's a little outside of the discussion, but that might be a way of kind of making it easier on the publisher to make sure that info's in there so that the plugin can then deal with it without them worrying about it.
Yeah, I think just in general, making it easier for publishers to use hashtags, no problem, and mentions on social media, even if initially it's just suggesting them and they have to copy and paste into the posts or into the Blog to Social scheduler. That would be the first step, and then automating it would be next. Anything else that we wanted to highlight here?
We basically already covered that second
I think
point.
we've covered this in one form or another, actually in a weird way in that first story. So kind of neat how these things come together. A lot of recurring themes through this stuff. So, all right, great, guys. Thanks so much. That was a fun one. I'm not sure, Carolyn, if you're still on with us, but thank you for joining, and hopefully we'll have you back. Well, thank you all again, and we'll talk to you all next week. Today in News Tech, the podcast covering innovation in digital journalism. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and subscribe on YouTube or any of your favorite podcast apps. We'll see you tomorrow.
At our hometown, we help newspapers build WordPress websites, design native apps, and develop digital subscription models. If you are interested in a free prototype of your publication on WordPress, go to ourhometown.com and click the Contact Us button.